Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Talking City podcast all about Manchester City and their players, which comes into very handy when Manchester City aren't in fact playing. Very rude of them not to play all year round, but thankfully the players never get any time off. So there is still plenty to talk about. My name's Simon Bajkowski, joined by Tyrone Marshall. How are we, Ty?
I'm good, thank you, Si. I'm good. Yes, a nice intro there. Given if we were just talking about Manchester City, it's fair to say this podcast would be over in about 5 minutes. Very rude of City not
Yes.
to join the transfer fun already.
Yeah, what on earth is Cheeky McGilliston doing? Who knows?
Honestly, bring Ralph Rangnick in.
But yes, it's thankfully Manchester City stars are never too far away from the headlines, and we had one of the stranger ones on Thursday when England drew 1-1 with Denmark to top their group, as Kyle Walker was keen to remind us
Yes.
afterwards. But it was a very laboured performance. I was really struggling for the right adjective to say there that is would not get bleeped out. But yeah, it was a it was a difficult to watch. I think it's fair to say, and certainly for anyone who is used to watching Manchester City's orchestrated football, it was a bit like having wandered into a circus and just seeing all kind of sights that you wouldn't normally see. Um, and afterwards, Gareth Southgate said that their midfield problems come down to not having the Kalvin Phillips replacement that they need. Yeah, what did you make of it all, Ty?
I mean, where do you start? Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was an absolutely shocking game of football. I went out for the first game and I watched the second one yesterday at home. My wife was at the theatre watching Aladdin with tickets she'd booked a year ago. So I watched it with my 4-year-old, who's not yet caught the football bug and gave it about 3 minutes before he turned his attention to watching Peppa Pig. And I think out of the three of us, I got the worst deal having to sit through that game and watch it. It was an absolute mess of a performance. It was so bad. And I felt quite sorry for Kyle Walker having to try and clutch at the positives after that. And he is right, they have got 4 points. They are top of their group. I think this is what they've done every single time under Southgate, or pretty much every time. Maybe the last two or three tournaments now, I think, win the first game, draw their second. And, you can see what Walker's getting at. It did make me laugh when he said, "This is tournament football." I thought someone better tell Germany they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Because,
Hostile atmosphere as well.
yeah, difficult coming to these grounds, but the neutral ones. I mean, it was the difficulty was the pitch. The pitch was absolutely dreadful, wasn't it? It was so bad. We saw that with Walker early on when he went down and changed his boots, and I think everyone
Yeah.
thought for a minute it was an injury. It was probably more of a boot change, but I don't think the pitch was conducive to good football. But yeah, I'm not sure you can really. You can really pin that on England's performance. It just felt like it was all over the place, like they'd never played together before. There was so little positivity to it, so little intent, just very defensive, just could not keep the ball. Some of the passing was awful. And then, yeah, I mean, it felt like a mad thing for the next Manchester United manager to say after the game that they were missing Kalvin Phillips. I mean, Phillips has done really well to win for England, to be fair, but he's had a tough time at City. He had an even worse time at West Ham. And, I mean, there's got to be English central midfielders capable of filling into that position. And if there's not, it's got to be on the manager. I mean, I still think Alexander-Arnold can work there. Gallagher brings a lot of the Phillips type energy. Adam Wharton looks really good. Or drop Bellingham back in there. I thought it was. I can see what he's getting at because Phillips has been excellent for England, but it just seemed like a slightly strange thing to say. I thought.
Yeah, it was just a very strange game to watch, in that
Mm,
I can't remember the last time I saw Declan Rice play so poorly,
yeah,
or Jude Bellingham, or Trent Alexander-Arnold. Um, Foden was better than he was the other day, but still not great. And Saka and Kane were fairly anonymous,
Mm.
other than Kane kind of getting the assist for the Denmark goal. But the Phillips thing sounds insane, but it's kind of the argument that we're at after 2 England games, in that Phillips is the ultimate kind of system player. Like, he allows everyone else in the team to work. He might not be the best individually, but he's been the perfect partner for Rice, and that allows, or did allow, Bellingham or whoever else was ahead of him to work in front. And it feels like, having everyone sort of said after the first game, "Oh, Jude Bellingham's amazing," now people are at the point of saying, maybe you need to drop one of your big names in order to get a bit more balance in the team, a bit of system, because the midfield was completely lost on Thursday. So it feels like the point is good. It's just that the Kalvin Phillips that Southgate's talking about has not been seen since he was at Leeds.
Yeah,
Is that kind of fair?
I think it's fair. Yeah, I mean, the Calvin Phillips he wants is the one from Euro 2021, really. And like you say, that's the last time he looked like that player, really. Um, and I don't know. I just think it's reductive to think we need that type of player in there to make everything else work. When you look at the talent on that pitch, I mean, Trent Alexander-Arnold is obviously a very different player to Calvin Phillips, but he occupied very similar positions to him last night. And if Declan Rice is a £105 million midfielder who is capable of playing the holding role as well as further forward, he shouldn't need a system player next to him to be able to play well. And, I mean, I thought he was the worst player on the pitch, to be honest. He was absolutely dreadful. He
Yeah.
barely passed it forward. And then by the end, when he was passing it back, he was passing it straight out for corners. He was all over the place. And I can see why Alexander Arnold went off, because you're not going to risk taking Rice off, and you needed that energy in there. That Conor Gallagher does bring the energy, just by fouling people mostly last night and then getting fouled himself, and that kind of summed up the game. That it was just so messy. And I think a lot of this, we're talking about system players, but a lot of it has got to start coming back to the manager. I mean, I've been quite defensive of Southgate over his previous tournaments and thought he's always done pretty well. And the last World Cup, I thought, was a big stride forward in terms of the quality of football played. But it's really gone backwards in this tournament. He's got a huge job on his hands to salvage it. And they look a poorly coached team all of a sudden, because there doesn't seem to be any ideas there. And I can't believe that is solely down to not having 2021's Kalvin Phillips there. I find it mad that would be the reason why. There's got to be something else at play here. And you're right on Foden. Foden was definitely much better. You could tell, sort of, I can't remember if it was just before Denmark scored or just afterwards, that he started drifting more and more from that left position. I think there was one point he was basically playing next to the centre halves just to try and get the ball. It was like he'd just seen enough and thought, this is atrocious. They need to just give me the ball. And he started trying to do more and more. But he was probably the best of those front three, because the other two, even though Kane scored the goal, the other two were hopeless. But it's baffling system wise how they can be playing so poorly when you look at the players. And I think the moment that summed it up, and this wasn't Kyle Walker's fault, but you could sense it was when the frustration bubbled over in the stands, when they had that really late free kick, and Pickford comes up to the halfway line to take it, and then passes it short to Walker, who then suddenly is like, "Oh, am I taking it?" And it just goes long and out of play. And it's like,
Yeah.
have you not got a plan? Has no one told you what to do in these situations? And just a real lack of taking responsibility. I mean, why is Pickford coming up to the halfway line to tap a free kick short? It's just totally bizarre. And that kind of sums it up, because they look like a team who don't really who were going onto the pitch without knowing what the plan or the idea is. And that a lot of that has got to go back to the coaching staff, really.
Yeah. And it was interesting, because Harry Kane said afterwards that they didn't really know how to press.
Yeah.
And, we're all experts at pressing now after years in the Premier League. And, you kind of know that if a team doesn't press well, they are really easy to play against.
Yeah.
Sort of Bournemouth under Iraola when they were just starting out, the press wasn't quite right, and they got battered for 8 weeks, and then it clicked, and they were all
Mm.
together again. And I think, United obviously for a lot of the season, not great. And then it just seems strange because Foden is one of the top pressers in the league. Kane has been one of the top pressers in the Bundesliga. Saka has been one of the top pressers in the league. Bellingham has been one of the top pressers in La Liga. How are they suddenly incapable of pressing in this England team? Like you say, it just sort of comes back to coaching. But it must be quite strange for these players who are used to being in such good systems
Mm.
to now be in this team and nothing really works. And it's a departure from England because, like I say, at previous tournaments, things have worked and they have at least looked coached and like the system works. It just all seems to have fallen apart in these sort of first two games.
Yeah, it does. And if you were looking at it glass half full, you'd maybe say that they always have a game like this in the group stage. Scotland 3 years ago, they drew with the USA in the World Cup. I think there's always a game there where things aren't clicking, and this is slightly clutching at straws, but part of me wonders if it's a deliberate plan to kind of get that early win and then kind of coast through the group stage. We know how much faith Southgate has put in. Like, this is how other teams have won tournaments, and I think he maybe likes the idea of very much easing his players into it, or them kind of coasting at 70% through the group stage, and then really going for it in the knockouts. And I mean, the way they played last night, that's probably going to prove me wrong, but that would be the straw clutching argument. But yeah, when you've got your captain and your striker saying we don't know how to press, it's not a good look. I mean, Kane looks absolutely knackered. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Moving to the Bundesliga and having a winter break was supposed to make players look fresher, but he looks he looks totally shot at the moment, and that might just be the system. But the pressing thing was interesting because the last I thought the last 20 minutes or so of the first half was, I mean, Denmark played through England's press so easily, and England just couldn't get past Denmark at all. Denmark pressed so well, and England couldn't get out. And that Denmark equaliser, I mean, it was an amazing goal, but it was the absolute definition of a goal is coming because England just could not get out of their final third. Pickford was playing it short. Players were being pressed, and it's kind of the opposite of, not only do we not know what to do when we're pressing, but when we're being pressed, we still don't know what to do. We don't know where our passing angles are, or the passing lanes are, or who's supposed to take the ball on, and there's just a lack of options on the ball. And yeah, I mean, it just felt like there were so many issues with it that it was just one horrible, horrible mess. And like you say, for players who have such clear systems and philosophies at their club sides, it must have been pretty confusing to play in that and feel like you just have no real idea what's going on.
And what also felt confusing to me is if we are clutching at positives, I'm sat watching it and maybe like the first 15 minutes of the second half, I'm thinking it's not that bad.
Mm,
Like it's not great, but there's the potential for them to cause Denmark problems. And if they score a second goal, then maybe no one talks about the performance so much.
yeah.
Um, it looked all right. And with your Guardiola hat on, you're kind of thinking, nothing's that broken, at least going forward. So there's not that much to fix. And then we suddenly get Harry Kane's off, Phil Foden's off, Bukayo Saka's off. Like three of your best players are off. Best players in sort of
In theory.
natural talent rather than
Yeah.
performance. But I mean, they weren't atrocious by any stretch of the imagination. They're all suddenly off for three newbies who your style of play is changing for completely. And it's just like, right, well, we've been trying this for a while, and now we're just going to completely change it, and everyone's going to have to adapt to this new way of playing. And that again seemed to me that something that you just Like none of the players could be used to that from their club football.
No, no, probably not. I mean, to be honest, I didn't mind that triple substitution from Southgate because it did feel like you said, the start of the second half was I wouldn't say bright, but it was better again. There was a little bit more control. I think Foden hit the post maybe in that period, didn't he? And
Yeah,
but then it had sort of gone again, and I quite like the boldness of Southgate looking at it. Criticised him before, but I liked the boldness of looking at it and just going, "This isn't happening. I'm just going to take the entire front three off and change them." Um, and I mean, it nearly worked with Watkins. I thought Watkins looked pretty bright when he came on. To be fair, certainly brighter than Kane had looked. Um, it didn't really improve the performance, and I guess it was a bit of a mad thing to do. But I liked the boldness from someone who's his substitutions have always been a bit of an issue, and I guess the one big issue from that France game in the last World Cup, and I've always said I thought England played well in that game and with a better team in that game, but the one issue was maybe the reluctance to make any changes until it was kind of too late. But this was pretty bold, and I don't really think, with the exception maybe of Foden, don't think those players could have had too many arguments. And yeah, I just liked the intent. And if it's not working for them, just get them off and give them a rest. And I think also, I mean, that maybe comes into the pitch. That looked a horrible pitch to play on, not just in terms of playing quality football, but it must have been a really tiring, leggy pitch to play on as well, given how heavy and horrible it looked. So maybe it makes sense just to get your best players off and rest them. So yeah, I mean, a bit of a crazy thing to do. And like you say, those players, you're probably thinking you replace them one at a time. Like even in training, Watkins has probably played with Foden and Saka at times rather than making the triple substitution. But I didn't dislike it particularly, and I mean it did almost work. So at least he was
yeah.
trying to be bold in that regard and do something different.
And do we think that Foden will be less a topic of conversation after this game? Because the first game it was very much, does Phil Foden need to be dropped? So do we kind of think he's played his way into the get the team again for the third game after that?
Yeah, I mean I don't think he was ever going to be dropped as much as people might have said it. And yeah, I mean you can't come away from that performance and think Foden's a problem. I've noticed a bit of chat on Twitter again this morning that there is talk of Foden, but I mean he was the one trying to make things happen. Um, and I still think he and England would look better if Luke Shaw was on that flank. But I mean, the fact Shaw is still training on his own makes that pretty unlikely. You'd think for the next group game. I mean, it's starting to look like a bit of a blunder, that decision to take him. If he's still training on his own 4 months after his injury, it's pretty hard to see how he's going to play much part in this tournament at all. But I still think there's more to come from Foden. He would definitely look better with a left-footed left back there, I think, or at least someone who gets forward a bit more naturally down that flank than Trippier, maybe, and he can push inside. But yeah, I mean, Foden is most definitely not the problem in that team.
No. I mean, I was interested that the BBC pundits kind of went so hard on Southgate's England. Not
Mm.
something I'm sort of used to seeing, but they seem to be kind of suggesting bringing him inside as a 10. But we wait and see. But yeah, it was all that optimism of the Euros, and then
I know. It's also
yeah,
given like the tournament has been brilliant as well. There's been so many really good, really
yeah,
entertaining games. Even like countries that you would never normally watch or don't know anything about particularly. Albania and Georgia have both had their moments. Like Albania were great against Croatia the other day. The Georgia Turkey game was amazing. So many good games. So many teams playing really, really well and looking really like attacking and structured and some really good attacking football. And then England go and produce that.
yeah. It's sort of people have teams have made the case for a 24 team tournament. They've just made the case for a 24 team tournament without England.
Hmm.
But we might be talking about the next winners, so you never
You never
know.
know.
But that is it for our first part, and we'll be back after the break talking a bit more about international football and also about what City have been up to. Hello, welcome back. Hopefully that was a little less distressing than the England game itself, but I mean, I wanted to talk about Kalvin Phillips again because it's always fun talking about Kalvin Phillips because he is such an interesting case.
Mm,
But you know, it seems such a stretch for England manager Gareth Southgate to say that they are missing Kalvin Phillips or they are missing the Kalvin Phillips from Euro 2021. But I mean, you could kind of make a case that City are missing him as well. There's kind of a lot of talk from the Spain camp at the moment that Rodri they're worried about his physical condition, and
mm.
that is primarily because City signed Kalvin Phillips 2 years ago to help with his workload, and he's not been able to fulfill that role. I mean, Spain looked very very good again
Yeah.
last night, and Rodri looked very very good. But I mean, with the games coming next season, are we kind of at a point where we kind of have to enjoy these Rodri performances while we can because it can't go on.
I mean, it feels like breaking point, doesn't it? I mean, Rodri is clearly worried about his own physical condition. The number of times he's come out and kind of said, I can't do this, I can't play this much. It's so rare for a player to actually say that in public, but he doesn't seem to mind. You go back to, I think it was the last tour, wasn't it, when he said about the treble season and how that pushed him into the red zone essentially, and the same thing has happened again. He only missed games last year really when he got suspended, and he's as vital to Spain as he is to City. He got absolutely walloped again last night, didn't he? I think he went down injured in the first game, I seem to remember, at
Yeah,
some point. And then last night, start of the second half, got absolutely taken out again and looked to be in a
yeah.
fair bit of discomfort. And,
He's
you
had
know,
to do it again, hasn't he? He got booked, so he misses the third game.
did he get booked last night? I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
For going up to the ref, this rule about you can't.
Oh, he's not the designated speaker.
Yeah, yeah. So he's saying like, if nobody's going to give me a rest, I'm going to have to get a card.
Yeah, the easy way to get a booking. Yeah, shouting at the ref. What do you want? Nothing. You've done it now. I just wanted that booking. um, yeah, probably a pretty wise move for him to get booked and miss that game. Now they're essentially through and they have looked really good. But it must be when you go into those games feeling like you're not quite at it physically, and then you get walloped in both of them, and pick up little just it's not the accumulation there, but it's more just these annoying little bumps and bruises and little knocks, and it must annoy him mentally as well that that challenge at the start of the second half yesterday looked particularly painful, and he is he is in the red zone, isn't he? We've talked about the calendar so much and the number of games that players are playing, and you look at City's potential schedule next season with the Club World Cup. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, no one seems to really want to actually play in that Club World Cup. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops, I guess, over the next 12 months. But it's totally unrealistic that you take Rodri as an example. He's playing every week for City for a couple of seasons now, and then he's got the Euros this year. He could have another tournament with 7 games in next summer, and then a World Cup the summer after that. There's just that is a 36-month rolling calendar essentially. What's he going to get off? Say Spain go to the final, he's probably going to get 2 weeks off, two and a half maybe.
Yeah,
City got to have a good chance of going to the Club World Cup final. Maybe he gets another 2.5 then. World Cup, maybe the same. I mean, it's just like that. And given the fact that he plays every international break, you're essentially having maybe 6 to 8 weeks off in 3 years there. It's crazy. It's totally unrealistic, and something has got to give. And it will be interesting to see which way it goes, because we've been in countless press conferences where Pep brings this up, but Pep always kind of says now it's on the players. Basically, the players don't want to do it; they need to do something, and you wonder if there will come a point where they make a stand. I guess they're such a disparate group that it's hard to get enough unity to do that, because for some players have knocked international football on the head. Some don't go to major tournaments and would enjoy something like the Club World Cup. You know, Erling Haaland's not been to a major tournament yet. He'd probably quite like to play in the Club World Cup as something different, and is in a totally different boat to someone like Rodri, I guess. But something has definitely got to give with the calendar. And, you know, Rodri, it feels like Rodri is kind of the poster boy, I guess, in a way for it now, because he's the one that's articulated it so well, and because he does just, you know, he gives that air of someone now who is kind of ploughing on, almost on autopilot now. You get the impression sometimes he's going into games and just doing it on muscle memory rather than just the enjoyment of it and the buzz of it. I guess it's just so relentless that it is just one game after another.
Yeah, I mean, City can do something for him, which is to sign
Mm-hmm.
another player. And because, you know, there's an acceptance that the Kalvin Phillips signing has just not worked out for anyone, and Phillips isn't going to rediscover the player that he was while he's at City. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not worked. But really, they do need to sign someone, especially with the extra games, the 2 extra games in the Champions League, and just
Yeah,
the accumulation. Like, it was harder last year for Rodri to do what he did than he did the year before, because he'd done the year before.
yeah.
So it feels like a sort of holding midfielder is essential for City this summer, if they are going to give Rodri the rest that he needs. And I know it's not easy to say, "Oh, we'll just sign a backup to Rodri," and, you know, sign someone who says, "Right, you play when Rodri's leg falls off." But that is kind of where they need to be, and the sort of the writing has been on the wall, so to speak, for quite a long time. So there aren't really any excuses if City don't sign that profile of player this summer, I would suggest.
Excuse me. No, I would agree with you. And, you know, we discussed this last. I think it must have been one with Joe, and compared. It's kind of like trying to find a backup for Rodri now is kind of like when Tottenham spent all those years trying to find a backup to Harry Kane. That Rodri is so good that when he is fit, he is going to play,
Yeah.
unless you're playing, you know, an easy winnable home game against a promoted team, or you're playing an FA Cup third round tie at a League One team, or you're playing in the League Cup. Beyond that, Rodri is essentially going to play. So it's finding that player who kind of accepts that position in the squad, but is also good enough to make the step up. And I mean, Tottenham found it. Tottenham found how difficult it was with Kane, and I mean, in a way, it felt like City should have had the right player with Phillips, because the attraction was that it was such a step up from Leeds that there was times where it was felt maybe he could play with Rodri, and, you know, you still look back on paper and you think that was kind of the perfect deal, which makes it all the more frustrating that it hasn't worked. I mean, the question is now, where do you turn? I mean, it'd be ideal for City if there was, you know, an academy graduate that was ready to step up into the first team and play 15 to 20, 15 maybe of the easier games next season in that position. But we're not really quite there at the moment. And that does mean they have to try and sign someone. And I guess it's, you know, it's easier to try and sign someone like a Kovacic, who you think can maybe do both roles, who can be more of an all-round midfielder that gets them more games. But you look at it now, and I don't think anyone really thinks Kovacic is an ideal fill-in for Rodri. There's you know, there's no one in that squad that is quite there in terms of stepping in for Rodri, and it's got to be an issue for City, and they've got to sign someone to do it. It's just really hard to work out who that player is when you know that Rodri, for big games, for the majority of games, is essentially undroppable, really, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah. And that, what you said about Phillips is why I said earlier, it was like, it's always fun to talk about Phillips, because it's not that
Mm.
it's sort of he is a figure of fun, it's that it should have worked out, that
Should have
transfer,
worked.
and nobody
Yeah.
could work out why
What? Yeah.
it's gone so inexplicably wrong. but it just has, and City need to deal with it.
Mm.
Just another piece of business from the Copa America, which has begun. The first goal of the Copa America has been scored by, you guessed it, Julian Alvarez.
Mhm.
Um, Now Alvarez is in a situation where his position at City isn't really going to change as a result of either this tournament or the Olympics. You know, if he does well, he will come back and try and play alongside Haaland and De Bruyne, and if he doesn't play well, he will come back and try and play alongside Haaland or De Bruyne. But while he is always behind Haaland, there's gonna be some clubs interested in saying to him, "Well, you can be the main man here." Um, and in that sense, does it make a difference for him if he walks away from this summer and says, "I was top scorer in the Copa" or top scorer at the Olympics? Does that change the dial for him at all?
I don't think so. I mean, he's been the perfect foil and backup for Haaland, hasn't he? You look at it, and City could have done or could do with kind of Maximo Peroni doing for Rodri, someone like that, what Alvarez has done. That he's the perfect profile to kind of
Yeah,
he works in that system maybe and can play those games and is happy filling in, and that's what Alvarez was for probably 18 months really. He has stepped up a level now, and I don't think it's going to be an issue this summer, but you could certainly see it in 12 months' time if Haaland is still, well, Haaland will still be there, but if Haaland is kind of recommitting to City and suggesting he's got years and years left at the Etihad, it kind of becomes a point where Alvarez says, well, I feel like I need to go and play regularly everywhere else. I mean, it benefited him last season that it benefited him that De Bruyne and Haaland both got injured and kind of got injured at different times in a way as well, really. And he obviously filled in for De Bruyne really well. Then he got the chance to fill in for Haaland, and Foden came in centrally. And there was enough injuries last year to get in games. And the first season, he proved himself a more than adequate backup as well to Haaland. So for 2 years, it feels like that dynamic has worked perfectly. And I think there's definitely another year out of it. I think there's enough games for we've seen them play together in the past, and I think they'll play together again at points next season. And I think there'll be points where Alvarez starts ahead of Haaland in certain games next season, and maybe there'll be a couple of injuries that strike, and he plays that attacking midfield role again. So there's easily enough games for Alvarez next year to be happy with that, I think. But the kind of trajectory he's on, you do wonder if it might hit a point where it's going to be so hard to keep both of those players happy long term at City, really, because they're both capable of probably starting for pretty much any club in Europe. So to have them in a team where you only tend to play one of them is difficult, and obviously that one is always going to be Haaland if push comes to shove. But I still think Alvarez. I don't think I think the Alvarez situation has got more legs in it yet, and I think he'll be an incredibly reliable player again next year. But it does feel like it's kind of heading towards a tipping point, doesn't it? And if he does thrive for if Argentina win the Copa America and he's banging in the goals again, it kind of just it alerts other clubs as much as anything, I guess, to a potential situation at City.
yeah. I think the problem, I can completely see other clubs being interested in Alvarez. I can completely see Alvarez being interested in that interest.
Mm.
But the problem he kind of has is that the better he does, the more appealing he becomes, the more his value goes up.
Yeah,
City have a guy who is 24, um, has an amazing CV already of things that he's won, and is under contract for I think another 3 years. So he's probably up there 100 million around that mark if anybody wants
yeah,
to come in, and the better he does, the more that will go up. It might
yeah.
come down a bit contractual situations and all that, but
I mean,
yeah,
but
go
there's
on.
no room for him at Real Madrid, is there? Clearly,
No,
with Mbappe and Vinicius and Rodrigo, Barcelona can't afford a €10 million player, never mind a €100 million player. I don't think any other
Yeah.
club in Europe can. So you're right. He's kind of got beyond a move to another Premier League club. He hasn't really got a route out, given the state of the state of the market, and that's kind of it's a problem for players like that, and then it's a problem for clubs when they want to offload players that the market is so compressed in Europe beyond one or two clubs that it's an issue. It's an issue for players and clubs essentially, isn't it? Especially in the Premier League. And yeah, I can see what you're saying. Alvarez is essentially going to be a victim of his own success, isn't he? That he kind of becomes stuck at City. Not that that's a bad thing, but if he wanted more,
Yeah.
there's no easy route for him to go and get that.
No, no. And that all kind of points towards the kind of common feeling at City, which you've written about today, which you can read on the website, that it feels like it's going to be another quiet summer
Mm.
for the club, because it's difficult to see how moves get done. I think they will bring in a few players, but it's not going to be a summer of sweeping changes. And it's reliant on a lot of players leaving if there are going to be sweeping changes, and it doesn't look like there are going to be a lot of players leaving, in part because it's hard to see where the buyers are going to come from to pay
Mm.
the fees that are kind of merited.
Yeah, definitely. And the last two summers has felt like kind of a refresh of the squad, and that's something Pepper's often talking about, that at some point you do need to refresh that squad and bring in new voices and new faces, and that's kind of happened over the last two windows. And it's early days, but this feels very much like a kind of 2021 window, doesn't it? Where they essentially just brought in Grealish, and I know Alvarez arrived then, but that deal had already been done, and it's definitely shaping up to be that sort of window. I mean, you look at it and you think that, like you say, they've got to sign someone who can cover for Rodri. It feels like that is pretty essential. Beyond that, unless someone leaves, I'm not sure there's a real. I mean, maybe the left back situation rears its head again, but I mean, Vardy will finish the season amazingly in that position, and if you're happy to play him there again, then it's less of an issue at the moment. And then beyond that, you're kind of just looking at the Edison situation and the De Bruyne situation, and maybe Bernardo. But like we said, I don't think there's a route for Bernardo anywhere really. Edison and De Bruyne are obviously with Saudi Arabia are distinct possibilities, but at the moment you're kind of looking at those two and thinking, who would we have as potential replacements? But beyond that, there's no great need to sign anyone really, and you could maybe make the argument that it would be wise to get ahead of that midfield rebuild, because if De Bruyne doesn't go this summer, I think it's pretty certain he goes next summer, isn't it? And Bernardo, I mean Bernardo's still only 30. I think he always gives the air of being someone older than that for some reason. I don't know why. Every time I look at him, I just think like he strikes me as someone who's like a 33, 34-year-old. He's always younger than I expect Bernardo. I don't know
Yeah.
whether it's the slightly receding hair, possibly, or just the way he plays. The way he's a bit of a throwback, isn't he? At
Yeah.
times, I think, in the way he plays, and he's just someone that every time I look, what's Bernardo now? It's like, oh yeah, he is. He's always younger than I remember. But you're never quite sure how long he's going to be at City for. So maybe there's an argument that you get ahead of the midfield rebuild by signing someone. But if neither of those two leave, I'm not sure that necessarily happens. So I think at the moment you'd certainly say it's shaping up to be a pretty quiet window, and for now I think all eyes are going to be on people like Edison and De Bruyne, those two especially, in terms of what it's kind of on them, isn't it? At this stage, what do they decide they want to do? Do they want to push for a Saudi move or something like that, or are they both content to stay? And if they say they're both content to stay, then they're going to stay, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. And that feels like a nice place to leave it for this episode. We'll keep our eyes peeled for anything that does go on in the market, but it does feel like we're in a bit of dead space as far as that's concerned, with the Euros and other tournaments going on at the minute, and also PSR being in place until June the 30th. But yes, we will we will see, and give us a like and subscribe if you have enjoyed us moaning about England. And we'll be back next week, I think, before the next England game. So it will be cheerier podcast,
Yeah,
of
we
course.
can hope so.
So, yes. Yes. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.